Hello, I am Lucy Holland. I am the author of Sistersong and most lately Song of the Huntress. Both of these are historical fantasy novels that reimagine ballads and mythology in historical time periods. I'm really excited to be telling you a little bit more about my work today. In this video, I'm going to be talking about why folklore and mythology are so popular right now. So the joy of exploring familiar stories in different contexts, which is at the heart of retellings, is that you have the advantage of familiarity. If you have a story that is well known by many people, it provides a basis for exploration. And in the same way as fantasy, high fantasy is known for doing this, you have an awareness too of certain tropes. Many people are aware of stereotypes and tropes that are used frequently in fantasy that appear across speculative fiction. And if you have a previous awareness of these, you're more aware of how an author can subvert them or present them differently. And I think that works for retelling. So, a story that is, say, for example, Circe, a really interesting retelling of the Odyssey from a perspective that we don't get to hear about very often. Stories are archetypal, so they'll always have a place amongst us in any era. I feel like it's important that every era is, writers of every era are allowed to retell these old stories in new ways. Retellings also give us the ability to reflect voices and lived experiences that may be hidden in traditional stories, in traditional narratives. Retellings very often focus on minor or marginalized characters, and they focus on giving these people a voice. Personally, I'm very interested in restoring queer identity to historical settings and using folklore and mythology as a way of doing this. They also provide an opportunity to kind of re-examine situations where identities may have been suppressed by the dominant narrative. So I'm very interested in the Song of the Huntress. I explore a lot about queer identity, a lot about asexual identity, bisexual identity. It's also a sapphic book. So all of my characters are people who probably didn't get, they don't appear in very many stories, especially in historical narratives. Generally history comes down to us through one very narrow lens. So my job as a writer is to restore those stories to these people to a time where they undoubtedly existed, but we haven't heard their stories yet. So folklore and mythology, they are the vehicles for these stories. They're a great way of understanding the world. Like fantasy, mythology and folklore are deeply concerned with archetypes, repeated patterns of human behaviour. And I think it helps to build a bridge between a modern reader's sensibilities and an ancient story, because we don't change as people. We are fundamentally the same. We haven't changed that much, and yet there are always new ways of seeing these things. So even though I say that I put queer identities into my books, essentially these people are us. I'm not doing anything especially radical in that. I'm just simply restoring people to the time periods where they undoubtedly existed. I think this idea of understanding the world, allows us to examine the contemporary issues through a less threatening lens. Fantasy's really good at doing this. So, some things that, if you hear authors speak about why they write, we all want to examine topics that we find difficult perhaps to engage with, in modern language or in a face-to-face discussion. Books are really, really good, just books in general, but specifically also fantasy is really, really good for, tackling subjects that many people might find difficult to approach if they only have a sort of contemporary vocabulary. This is the power of archetypes that are really fantastic for exploring stories in a safe space, a less threatening space. So British and Celtic folk tales, I feel, they're much more underexplored than, say, Greek mythology. Most people kind of default to Greek, but I feel like this is an untapped area of mythology. There's so many rich and interesting pieces of folklore and characters from the British Isles. People think of Ireland a lot when you say the word Celtic. But Welsh myth is also a major part of the kind of Celtic mythology cycle, and it's distinct from English folklore and English identity. We tend to these days conflate British and English, but originally the Britons were absolutely a distinct group of people from the English. And actually, England has kind of assimilated many other folklores and folkloric traditions. Folkloric figures, for example, from Welsh myth, Arturius, our King Arthur was originally a British myth that is now very much part of a kind of English canon. And I mean, same thing with the Welsh bard Merlin. He became the Arthur's famous magician, Merlin. So I feel like there's still this, absolutely, I'm just scratching the surface. I'm giving you 2 examples of characters who everybody, is familiar with, but there are so many more out there, and I feel like this is, I have no real desire to go and explore Greek mythology when we have such a rich culture right here in the British Isles. I think that there's many parts of our, the mythology, I was talking about the mythology of the British Isles that, we possibly have lost, or it's not as well known as it should be. And I feel like we should look to Wales very much for answers in this. Because despite 1,000 years of English oppression, their stories, like the Mabinogion, Cilwch and Owen, these are ancient, they're medieval texts. But despite this years of English oppression, these stories are still alive, and we still have access to them. And that is a remarkable achievement, to have this access to the original British identity. Interestingly as well, Christianity had a unique effect on the stories that have been passed down to us. Our earliest songs and stories from the British Isles were originally written well, they weren't written down at all, they weren't written until later, but they would have been communicated in Old Welsh or Cumbric. And, they would have survived, they would have been communicated orally. But they survived generally due to monks writing them down in the 11th and 12th centuries. While this is fantastic because we now have these stories and I can use them to draw upon, my own ideas, I can use them to influence my own work, you do wonder what may have been suppressed by these people, by monks, by the Christian agenda. And that is a theme that I explore quite extensively in Sistersong and also in Song of the Huntress. Also, we live in a world that is constantly subject to technological change. And going back to ancient folklore, ancient stories can be a powerful reminder of human strength. And today we explain a lot of the world's mysteries away by using science, by using technological knowledge. And myth, of course, harks back to a wilder and more mysterious time, when the world was explained differently because we simply didn't have the knowledge that we had today. But I feel like we can learn a lot from this. I feel like we can, for example, another one of my major themes is ecology, looking to reconnect with nature. We are not doing so well today. We're not looking after our planet, and so this theme of reconnecting with the earth that we came from, it's what original religions, pre-Christianity, pantheistic pagan religions did really well, is honouring nature and the world the earth that we came from. A lot of its festivals, are to do with, planting, harvest, preparing for the dark times to come ahead, and that sort of looking down rather than turning our eyes up to the sky. I feel like that is something we can really learn from. Even though today we think we know all there is to know about the world, but I feel like stories can kind of possibly help us to find that connection again, and it's something we should think about as we continue moving forward into this a very different Earth than the one that even my characters were experiencing 1,500 years ago. Yeah, these are just a few of the reasons why I think that retellings of folklore, of folk ballads, of mythology are so popular at the moment. They give us this ability to reconnect with ancient stories. And I really hope that you enjoy reading Song of the Huntress.